a good man that we're going to remember his life and celebrate his life and say goodbye today, and just for today. There'll be other days that you'll have thoughts and remember stories. I know we'll hear a few good ones today. And that's what really makes it nice. And I'm going to turn it over at this point to Noah. He has some words, and then save some time for Gary, because you know he's got some good things too. All right, fellas. Thank you.
All right, if you guys would all pray with me, please. Lord, we come before you with heavy hearts, obviously, but also very excited, very happy to be a part of Grandpa's life. He lived a great life, and we know that you're watching over all of us now in his absence. And I just ask that you help us remember the good times. We don't want this to be a somber event, Lord. We want you to help us lift our hearts to enjoy the great memories that we share with Grandpa. Ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Good morning, everybody. I'm Noah. I'm Jack's oldest grandson. And for some reason, I got elected to stand up here and speak. So be patient with me. It's not going to be easy, but it is going to be fun. Some of you, some of these stories aren't going to make sense to you, and some of them you're not going to find funny, but we do. It's our Jack, it's our Grandpa, and quite honestly, we want to celebrate his life. So just be patient with us as we remember my Grandpa. Okay? So I got a few words. Let's start out with something I wrote Sunday morning at 3:21 a.m. I wrote this to try to help myself kind of get through the news. It is interesting the things you think about when you can't sleep. I'm laying here awake because I found out a few hours ago that Grandpa Kline passed away. I believe my mind is being kind to me because all it will allow me to think about is how much fun I had with him. When I look back at my life, not exclusively, but a majority of the fun times included him. We learn a lot from the people that we love. Grandpa taught me how to laugh and have fun. I could have learned a million things, but that's what I remember most tonight. And let's be honest, he is exactly where he has wanted to be from the moment Grandma passed away. And so I want to start with that. Most of you here in this room were probably here almost 17 years ago. You want to talk about love, you want to talk about true love, that was the picture of true love. My Grandma Darlene and my Grandpa Kline. We all should be so lucky to have the life that they had. And quite honestly, we all felt a little disappointed, maybe even a little bit angry at God because she left us so early. And I don't think Grandpa ever came to terms with that. And that's okay. Because without her, he wasn't the same. He was still Jack Kline, but he wasn't the Jack Kline that we all loved and knew. And I stand here before you feeling a little bit guilty as the oldest grandchild because I got the most time with him. Got the most time with Grandma, I got the most time with him. And I'm thankful, but I also feel a little guilty about that because I have some wonderful, wonderful cousins that didn't get the time that I got. And so I don't know why I'm so blessed, but I am. The picture of my mind that always comes to mind when I think of my grandparents together was at Denise and Matt's wedding, the two of them dancing. And I know Roxanne brought that up this week, and it's a beautiful memory. I think they met at a dance, quite honestly, or they spent a lot of time dancing. And they were both healthy at the time, and they danced the night away, and it was a beautiful picture. Family mattered a lot to Grandpa. He and Jerry and Marge, quite honestly, came from humble beginnings. If you don't know the story, you should hear the story sometime. Today's not the day. But quite honestly, the three of them could have threw their hands up and said, we got the short end of the stick. But they didn't. They decided to persevere, and all three of them became wonderful, wonderful people. And I think a lot of people today would have given up with the circumstances that they were dealt as young ones, but they didn't. And so I'm proud to be a part of that family. Marge, Jerry, and my grandpa have always been people that I've been able to look up to. And I don't know what I would have done without them. But family, to go a little bit further with that, some of the stories I asked people in the family to send me stories. Some of the things that I think about with Grandpa, and I know Sarah brought this up earlier this week, is how he'd want you to sit on his lap, and he'd take your arm and jab him in the beer gut, and then he'd act like he was dying, and that was his game. And he did it with all of us. And I guess I was the first one to get to do that, and again, I feel a little guilty for that, but it was wonderful, wonderful memory. One thing I remember from a little kid was he had this thing whenever Mom and Dad would take me over to see him and Grandma. Before I left, I always had to give him a kiss and a pow. And I'm sure most of you never heard that, but that was his way of saying goodbye. He would kiss me, and he would shake my hand, and that's what kiss and a pow was. And you always had to give Grandpa a kiss and a pow. And you know, I could go on and on about the camping trips, the Cubs games, the time at the farm, but I don't want to take up too much time because I got a few stories that I'd like to share. Yeah, I got written down here, how do you sum up a life like this? I don't know. I'm trying. I'm doing the best I can with the few minutes that I have. But I think it would be short-sighted of me or any of the rest of us to try to spend 5-10 minutes up here and sum up a life like he had. You know, it's funny. I was thinking the other day about his favorite baseball player, Ron Santo. He loved Ron Santo, and it finally hit me in my mind why I think Ron Santo was his favorite baseball player. When you think about Ron Santo, the words you hear most often about him was he was loyal to a fault, he was a homer, he was too small to do what he did, he was a competitor, and he was extremely outspoken. If that doesn't describe my grandfather, I don't know what does. You know, that was Grandpa. So the Ron Santo comparison just kind of came to me, and it makes a lot of sense to me. Friends meant a lot to Grandpa. Saw a lot of them come through here today, and some of them are still here. You know, John Shue, Jim Budrow, Carl Ford, Phil Anderson, Bob Bennett, and Kenny Vance. And I want to take a minute just to say a few words about Kenny. They were a partnership for many years right here in Earl Park. He and Kenny, they were kind of a mismatched duo. But if you think about it, it makes sense because, you know, Kenny being the man of God that he is, and quite honestly, my grandpa was man of the people. I mean, if he didn't represent the common man, I don't know who did. And the two of them spent countless hours taking care of people. Most people don't know all the things that they did. Mowing the graveyard, taking care of widows. And I think they offset each other pretty well. And unfortunately, Kenny, with his health, wasn't able to be with us today, but we love him. We love his family. The friendship that he showed my family, my grandfather, but they were a dynamic duo. They really offset each other and really balanced each other out. Sports was a big thing for Grandpa. If anybody, you know, spent any time with him, you knew that that's what he enjoyed. I've talked to friends and people over the years and explained to them how my grandfather and grandmother, I mean, literally hardly ever missed anything that we ever did. The joke always was, if Ballswell was having tiddlywinks and I was in it, he was going to be the first one there. And he was probably going to set up the brown van with the awning and the chair and the cooler. And by the time the tiddlywinks game was half over, most of the fathers would be out there sitting just like at the Little League. So many great memories. Going to the Cubs games, he used to love loading us all up in the van and driving to Chicago. And when he couldn't do that, he loved to sit out at the farm with his PBR and listen to the games. And the thing that was beautiful over the years as he went to game after game after game, especially when Nate was playing, when Nate's team would fall behind 2 or 4 points, it's over. It was over with. He was ready to pack up the van and travel back home. He never believed in a comeback, I guess. Wow, this is hard. Obviously, for you that knew him well, remember how much he loved his farm that he and Kenny had together. Just listening to games, swimming in the pond, drinking a few beers, playing pool, playing euchre. When I asked my cousins to send me memories this week, those are the things that they brought up. And I got to take just a second to talk a little bit about euchre. If you never got a chance to play euchre with Grandpa, you missed out. It was an experience like you've never had. As children, we all learned at his right knee. He taught us how to play. Interesting. He was a fierce competitor, but he would not cheat. He wouldn't cheat at cards. He would take a loss before he would cheat. He caught me one time cheating. And he let me get away with it, and then he pulled me aside later and told me he'd jerk a knot in my tail if he ever caught me doing it again. I never cheated again. But euchre meant family. Euchre meant friends. Euchre meant Spanish peanuts. Euchre meant sayings like bang with the egg money. You'd be shot in the pool room if you played like that. Don't send a boy to do a man's job. My favorite, shaking the bush. I got to tell a little story about my cousin Kyle. And I'm sure Kyle doesn't even remember this, but years ago when Kyle came home from Florida with Dee and Sarah, Grandpa was trying to show him how to play euchre. And I give Kyle all the credit in the world because I don't think he wanted to play, but he played. And so Grandpa was playing and Kyle was his partner, and we got around a couple times, and firsthand, Kyle throws trump. And Grandpa says, "Kyle, do you know that's trump?" And he goes, "Well, of course, Grandpa, I'm shaking the bush." My grandpa, he started giggling, which you all know that giggle, and he cried. He almost cried. He was laughing so hard. So I'll never forget that. Grandpa, I was shaking the bush. I remember talking about going to Nate's games. He and Grandma loved to travel to Nate's games. And I remember one time we went up to Chicago for one of Nate's AAU tournament games. And back when I was a little bit younger, I thought I knew everything, and as most of you know. And I didn't like the officiating a whole lot in Nate's game, and I was letting them know. And this is how bad I was about it, that my grandpa finally told me to shut the hell up, which he'd never done because I was the first grandchild. I could do no wrong. Well, I told him to shut the hell up. And we went back and forth for a couple minutes, and finally I just walked away and sat someplace else and yelled at the officials. Well, we drove all the way home from Chicago without speaking to each other, which, if you know my grandpa and me, that's nearly impossible for us to get from Kentland to Earl Park without saying something. We finally pull into Earl Park, and he looks at me, and I look at him, and we just started laughing. And it was a beautiful time. He had a great sense of humor. Denise, when she was 6, was being Denise right before Christmas. And most of you know what being Denise means. She was being a brat, as he would say. And he kept telling her, "Denise, you're going to get sticks for Christmas if you don't straighten up." Well, that didn't scare Denise, except for on Christmas morning when she unwrapped a box full of sticks. And he used that against her for the rest of her life, basically. He always threatened for the rest of her life, Denise, if you don't behave, you're going to get sticks for Christmas. Tyler was telling me about a time a few years ago when he and Denise were living with Grandpa, and Grandpa wasn't doing real well, and Tyler had been multiple times that summer out way too late doing stuff that kids at that age do, and he'd come sneaking in the back door, and my grandpa would always say, "Denise, is that you?" And Tyler would say, "Yeah, that's me." So he wouldn't get in trouble. Truth be told, Grandpa knew, and Grandpa enjoyed the fact that Tyler was out way too late. Mom's got boots on today. Typical Grandpa fashion. Up until the very end, he kept his sense of humor. Mom would walk into the nursing home with those boots on, and Grandpa would start singing to her, "These boots are made for walking." He always had a saying, always had a song for almost everything. But right up to the end, this winter, his good friend Jim was late. Jim Budrow was late getting to see him, and Jim was there almost every day. And Grandpa said, "Jim, where the hell you been?" You know, Grandpa had expected him hours before, and Jim said, "Well, I had to wait for somebody to scoop out my driveway." Grandpa said, "Well, why don't you scoop out your own driveway?" "Well, I've only got 25% of my heart usage," Jim said. Grandpa said, "Well, that's easy, Jim. You go out and you scoop 25% of the snow, you go sit down, and then you scoop another 25%. That made sense to him. My all-time favorite, as you know, Grandpa liked to have fun. He sometimes drank more beer than he should have, which was okay, because he was never to hurt anybody. It was just so everybody would have fun. I was a little guy, maybe about Kate's age, and I'm sitting on the couch with Grandma waiting for Grandpa to come home. That was always big fun when Grandpa got home. Well, he'd stopped at the G&T, and I'm sure there was a card game and maybe some horseshoes, but got a little bit late, and I think Grandpa had a few beers. So I'm sitting on what they called the Davenport, along the wall, and you could feel the truck come up by the house, and you could feel the lights go by, and I was excited. Wow, Grandpa's here. So Grandma and I were reading books, and we're sitting there, and about 5 minutes rolls by. No Grandpa. Got to be about 15 minutes since Grandpa pulled in. Grandma finally looks at me and says, "Let's go to bed. I think Grandpa's going to sleep in the truck." And I'm sure at some point he made it in. He needed to take a little nap. And that same wall that I sat on, his beloved son Larry, one day, on the way to the grocery store, I think to get bread for me when I was a little squirt, thought it was a good idea to hit the house twice as he was backing out. And if any of you know my grandpa, you can imagine the words that were coming out of his mouth after the second time he hit the house. Again, I don't know how to sum up Grandpa's life. I really don't. I don't know the words that make sense. All I know is, like I said earlier, I learned a lot from him, but how to have fun and laugh is what he taught me. And life is hard. Life is really hard, and he's a perfect example of how the hard life can be at times. And you need to laugh. You need to laugh. You need to have some fun, because as we saw with my grandma, before you know, it'll all be over with. And when I heard Grandpa passed away, got a couple more things to finish with. I thought, he's finally with Grandma, but more importantly, he's in a place that he said he'd never be. He used to laugh all the time. Now, heaven, no way. They won't let a guy like me in there. And I think if he could talk to us right now, there'd be a couple things he would say. First of all, God is real. God is present. God is alive. And Jesus Christ, his Son, is real. And he is here to have a relationship with you, just like he's having a relationship with Grandpa now. And I think he would like for all of us to get right with God, and whatever that means to you. Because I'm sure he is. I'm sure he is. And I also thought that he got up to the pearly gates. I'm sure he looked to St. Peter, looked around and said, really? Said, well, while we're here, why don't you go get Jesus and see if he can find a fourth, because we got to use it. And I'm going to end with this. Like I said, I asked for information, stories, or anything from my cousins, and this hit me, and it brought tears to my eyes because it's so true. Trevor, youngest grandchild, summed up Grandpa this way. I don't really have a specific story. All I know is that Grandpa and I could talk to each other about anything, and we could do absolutely nothing and still have a good time together. I don't know what else to say than that. That is a perfect ending to his life. So with that, if we all could pray one more time as we say goodbye to Grandpa, I'd really appreciate it. Lord, thank you for giving me the words. Thank you for holding me up here when I felt like my knees were going weak. I know you've sat and you've talked with Grandpa now, and he's asked his questions, which we all know that he needed answered, and I know you've given him the answers now. And I know his heart's finally at peace because he has the answers that he's been looking for a long time. I also know that he and Grandma are dancing to a Sinatra tune right now and finally enjoying the time together that they missed out on. Lord, I just thank you for this wonderful group of people that have gathered to honor him. I'm blown away by the outpouring of love and affection from friends, family, and the community. And Lord, I hope you watch over all these people as they travel back to their homes and to their lives. Lord, thank you for giving us Jack Kline. We're all better people for having time with him and having in our lives. I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. I'd like to turn it over to Larry.
Thanks, Noah. That was excellent. Noah talked a lot about some of the same things that I'm going to talk about, but like Noah, I was up at 3:30 in the morning after I got the news, and I thought, how can I honor Dad, and how can I write the things down that were important to me? And while I was laying in bed, I came up with my top 9. And for many of you, you might wonder why top 9, not top 10. 2 reasons. Number 1, number 9 is my favorite number. And number 2, there's 9 innings in a baseball game. And as all you know, his love for the Cubs and everything. But just the 9 things, and most of them are going to sound like what Noah said, but just a couple things from me. Number 1, he taught me very early on about commitment. When I was 11 years old, I wanted to play baseball, and I wanted to play in Fowler, Indiana. And Dad, Mom didn't drive. That was going to be quite a commitment for Dad to get me to Fowler. And I made every game early. We were always the first ones there. And as Noah said, Dad and Mom were at every game. And I think Dad and Mom never missed a baseball game of mine from 11 years old till I played through college. And so that was 1. 2, one of my memories is, Dad and I didn't fight a lot, but man, we had one battle every year, every day, and that was linked to my hair. And he hated the fact that I wanted to have long hair. And back in the 70s, that was the big thing. And he hated it. We battled. And then it didn't help, Kenny Vance's best friend was the barber. So I had 2 people that I had to battle. And it got so bad when I can't remember if I was a junior or a senior. I think a senior. I moved in with Deb and Noah. Gary was in Germany, And I moved to Fowler with Deb and Gary, or with Deb and Noah, because I was so mad at Dad. I think it was several days. And I can tell you now, I'll never move in with my sister again. Third thing I think about Dad, and that's work ethic. Dad worked harder after the day than he did, most people did during the day. Dad and Kenny Vance were either building something or tearing something down. And because of that, that's how they also got the farm. And he spent a lot of time out there planting trees and everything else. So, and I think he's built that into all of the grandkids, and they all understand the work ethic. Number 4 was camping. He loved to sit by a campfire, have a cold beverage, listen to the Cubs, and he would sit for hours and watch a campfire. I mean, you would have thought it was the greatest movie of all time, because he could sit there and watch it all day and all night. 5th were the Cubs. He would sit on the front porch, he'd watch the TV, he loved his Cubs, he loved Ron Santo, and he could watch them forever. But it was really interesting. Over the past 2 or 3 years, he couldn't watch the Cubs. But every time I'd bring up the Cubs, and he'd say, well, how are the Cubs this year? And before I could answer, he would say, I'm sure they're just as bad as they ever were. And unfortunately, he was always right. And unfortunately, he's taught me and all the grandkids to be Cub fans. So we have to live that. It's one thing we have to thank him for. I think that we're going to be Cub fans forever. 6, IU. He loved his Hoosiers. He really loved Bobby Knight. And he absolutely loved beating the Boilers. Whenever he could beat the Boilermakers, he was thrilled. Number 7, euchre. Noah talked a lot about that. He loved playing euchre. He taught most of the grandkids to play, and because of that, they still all play, and we still, as a matter of fact, my 2 sons and Noah's brother Nate, we have a euchre Olympics every year, and there's one of the grandsons in there that could use a little more practice, and he's getting better. He's getting better. And number 8, family. He loved the Christmas parties and the Thanksgivings and his grandkids. And I think today, all the grandkids are going to be pallbearers, and I don't think we could do more of an honor than that. And last, for 16 and a half years, he's missed Mom more than anybody has ever missed any loved one. There's just no doubt in my mind. And, Roxanne said it best. He's dancing with her now, and he's smiling. And that's where he needs to be. And she couldn't have said it any better. So, Dad, we're going to miss you. We love you. And enjoy being with Mom. Goodbye.
This time we will be dismissing you and making our way to the Air Park Cemetery. We'll give you the opportunity as you're dismissed to come up and pay your last respects and view. And at that point, I would like, when the pallbearers are ready, to step over here. Everyone else will be going to their cars, and then we'll close and come and get you to help us put Jack into his car to go to the cemetery. Thank you again for helping this family, grieving their loss, and staying together. And I don't know if you have any announcements as far as where you guys are going. It's fine after the cemetery. That'll conclude our services today. So, thank you.